Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I used to deliver construction materials for a small supply company based out of Springfield, Missouri. It wasn't a glamorous job, but it paid my rent and kept me on the road, which I actually liked. Something about the isolation of those early morning drives, especially before sunrise, always felt calming. The world hadn't woken yet, and it felt like I had it all to myself. But that morning on Route 60 was different. The air was colder than usual, fog hanging so thick it looked alive. My headlights barely cut through it. I remember the crunch of wet gravel beneath my tires when I pulled out of the lot, the coffee steaming in its cup holder, the smell of diesel and damp dirt clinging to the air. It was just before 5 when I passed the first set of orange cones along a closed-off construction strip. I didn't think much of it. Missouri roads are always torn up somewhere, but I hadn't seen this particular zone yesterday. My company updates us on closures, and this one wasn't on any list. That gave me a small pause. Still, I figured maybe the county had just started overnight work. About half a mile in, I noticed a flicker of light through the fog. Then a figure. He was standing between two traffic signs, holding what looked like a flashlight or a wand. The reflective vest glowed whenever my beams hit it, and I could see him waving one arm slowly, motioning for me to stop. I slowed down. My first thought was that maybe there'd been an accident or an equipment spill. He kept gesturing until I came almost to a full stop. Then, pointing, he signaled toward a small gravel path that cut off from the main road, leading toward a dirt pit in the fog. I leaned out my window. "You need help?" I called out. He didn't respond, just kept pointing. My instincts told me something was off. He wasn't close enough for me to see his face clearly, but something about the way he moved, choppy, like he wasn't fully balanced, made the hair on my arms rise. Then, for half a second, I turned my head to glance at my GPS, and when I looked back, he was gone. Not walked away, not stepped aside, just gone. The spot where he'd been standing was empty, only fog curling where the beam hit. My pulse thudded in my ears. I edged the truck forward, headlights sweeping the dirt path. No footprints, no worker. I turned back toward the main road and drove for another couple of miles until I saw a small gas station still lit for overnight truckers. The place was quiet, the smell of breakfast grease and stale coffee leaking out as I stepped inside. The clerk, an older guy with a name tag that said Pete, eyed me when I asked if construction crews had set up near mile marker 42. He shook his head. "Ain't nothing out that way tonight," he said. "Been that way for weeks. You sure you didn't dream it?" I wanted to laugh, but my stomach was twisting. I'd seen the cones. I'd seen the figure. Dreaming didn't feel like the right word. Pete added, "You probably saw an old setup. They tore that zone up months ago. Heavy accident out there last fall. Fella got hit. They shut the site down till they finished the investigation." That didn't sit right either. I'd just driven past fresh cones. Reflective tape. It looked brand new. By the time I got back in my truck, the fog was starting to thin, letting the pale sunrise bleed through. My nerves calmed enough to finish my route, but that whole stretch stayed in my mind. That missing worker, that gravel path. It all felt unfinished, wrong. The next day, I had the same route. I told myself I'd take that stretch again, just to see it in daylight. When I reached it, everything looked old. The cones were brittle, faded orange. The signs were rusted over. And that gravel path. It was overgrown, the weeds so thick it looked untouched for years. Curiosity made me stop. I stepped out, boots sinking into the damp grass. The silence felt heavy against my ears. No machinery, no birds. Just the wind humming through the stalks. I traced the narrow drive down to where I thought I'd seen the man waving. Half buried in the dirt near a mound of collapsed fencing was a rusted piece of rebar, curved awkwardly, almost like the shape of that flashlight I saw. That's when I noticed the sign. It was laying flat, half covered by mud. When I kicked it aside, the words were clear enough under the grime. Road closed. Site accident investigation. My chest felt hollow. The letters looked faded, old, worn from years in the rain. But when the wind gusted again, I swear the reflective paint shimmered for a split second, like someone's vest catching my headlights. I backed away slowly, turned and got into my truck. As soon as the engine caught, I floored it out of there. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Pete's words. Fella got hit. I looked it up later. It didn't take long to find the article. A construction flagger was killed along Route 60 last year. Same mile marker. The driver had ignored early morning warnings to slow for an active site. The man had signaled for help right before being struck. His name was Mark Naylor. The photo attached to the article showed him standing at a site almost identical to the one I'd driven through. Same reflective vest, same type of flashlight. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the fog and that waving motion, faint but insistent, like he was begging for something, maybe for someone to stop. I still take that highway sometimes for work, but I refuse to leave before dawn now. I don't want to see him again, not in the way I did that morning. Someone once told me the dead linger in places they're wronged, replaying the last thing they did. If that's true, then maybe Mark isn't waving for help anymore. Maybe he's just trying to make sure no one else doesn't slow down. And every time the fog rolls thick across the fields, when I spot the reflection of roadwork cones in my headlights, I can't help but ease on the brakes, just in case he's still out there, waiting for someone to finally see him. If you're still listening, you probably enjoy stories like this. A like or a comment helps keep them alive. I'm a registered nurse, working nights at the hospital in Apple Valley. I've been doing it for almost a decade now, and I can tell you, graveyard shifts do something to your mind. That stretch between 3 and 6 in the morning feels detached from the rest of the world. The hallways echo differently, and even the hum of the monitors starts to sound alive. That morning, I clocked out a little past 5:30. The fluorescent lights in the parking lot buzzed faintly above a half-empty lot. I slid into my car, still wearing my scrubs, exhausted, eyes gritty from staying awake all night. It was one of those desert mornings where the horizon starts to glow orange long before the sun shows up. Dust in the air, warmth barely beginning to creep into the chill. I started my usual drive west, heading down toward Barstow. It takes about 40 minutes to reach my place from the hospital, and most of that route runs through open highway surrounded by nothing but sand and silence. I actually like it that way. It's peaceful, predictable. About 10 minutes out, my GPS chirped and rerouted suddenly. Faster route found, saved 12 minutes. Normally, I ignore those, but that morning, I felt strangely impatient. Maybe because I'd been up all night, or maybe because the idea of getting home a little faster sounded almost too good to skip. So, without thinking twice, I followed the new route. The GPS pointed me toward a narrow detour just before mile marker 214. There was a small blinking arrow sign indicating alternate route, road, work ahead. Nothing alarming about it. I slowed down, pulled off the main highway, and followed the temporary cones into a side road lined by patches of sand and debris. At first, it looked like your typical construction zone, heavy machinery parked to one side, yellow floodlights still buzzing, everything washed in that dry desert haze. But the deeper I drove, the stranger it felt. For one, there were no workers. Not a single person, even though all the equipment looked active. Fresh tire prints, a generator humming somewhere nearby, and dust still unsettled over the asphalt. I turned down the music, and that's when I first noticed how quiet everything else was. No trucks in the distance. No morning traffic. Even the desert wind seemed to hush. My phone had dropped signal about a mile back. Not unusual out there, but combined with everything else, it gave me that sinking, weightless feeling in the chest. Like my body knew something wasn't right, even before my mind did. The road curved, passed under a half-finished overpass, and then twisted again. I caught sight of a billboard ahead, a weathered one for some diner called Sandy's Pancake House. I remember because the sign had a picture of a stack of pancakes dripping with syrup, and I thought about coffee. I kept driving. A few minutes later, the same billboard appeared again. Same leaning pole, same tear along the corner where the paint had peeled away. At first, I assumed maybe they had another one nearby. Companies sometimes line up duplicates when there's not much else out in the desert. But then it happened again. Driving another mile, same angle, same exact billboard, even the same bird perched on the frame. My heart thumped once, hard. I knew what déjà vu feels like. Quick, fleeting. This wasn't that. This was repetition. I slowed down to 15 and stopped the car right there in the middle of the empty lane. I turned off the engine and listened. The wind had picked up slightly, carrying fine sand across the road in thin sheets. Every couple of seconds, something knocked faintly in the distance, like metal clanging against metal. I stepped out, boots crunching over grit, and tried to listen for human voices. Nothing. I was about to get back in when I noticed something through the haze ahead. A figure, maybe 30 yards away, near a piece of heavy equipment that looked half buried in sand. They were dressed in what looked like a white hard hat and a reflective vest. Relief flooded me. Finally, a worker. Maybe I'd taken the wrong lane or missed a sign. I waved and shouted, "Hey, you guys closing up early?" The figure didn't react. They were standing with their backs slightly turned, motionless. I tried again. "Hey, is this the right detour for 214? Still no answer. That uneasy static sensation crawled up my spine, the kind that makes your skin feel stretched too tight. I climbed back into the car, but watched the figure through the windshield. For a second, it looked like he started turning his head. The glare of the sunrise hit from behind him, and I could swear his face seemed distorted, like I was watching through a heat mirage, the lines of his features blurring and shifting. Then, my radio clicked on by itself. A sharp burst of static filled the speakers, loud enough to make me flinch. My hands shot toward the dial, but before I could touch it, I heard a voice cut through. It was my own voice. It whispered my name. 3 times. I froze. The entire car felt electrified, like the air pressure had suddenly changed. The voice repeated again, this time stretched and warped, as if underwater. That was all I needed. I hit the gas. The tires spun and screeched against gravel before catching traction, and I sped forward, keeping my eyes locked on the faded double lines. The fog, or maybe dust, grew thicker the faster I went. No more landmarks, no more billboards, just endless turns and concrete barriers that all looked identical. For one terrible second, I thought maybe the road really was looping, trapping me in some kind of half-built labyrinth. Then, like a curtain lifting, the fog just cleared. I burst back onto a wide-open highway. I recognized it instantly. It was the main 40 heading west. The sunlight hit me so bright it hurt my eyes. I pulled over onto the shoulder, shaking so badly I had to brace my hands on the steering wheel to stop them. My chest felt hollow, adrenaline leaving me lightheaded. I checked the dashboard clock, 8:42 a.m. Somehow, 2 full hours had passed. The entire detour felt like maybe 20 minutes. Tops. My coffee cup was still warm. I drove the rest of the way home in silence. The radio dead, GPS stuck on an endless recalculating loop. Later that afternoon, after I'd finally calmed down, I decided to report it to the local road authority. I didn't want anyone else driving through that stretch. It hadn't felt safe. When I called, the dispatcher asked me to repeat the start point and distance markers twice. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Ma'am, there's no detour out there. That project near 214, it's been postponed for over a year." I started to argue, told her I'd driven it myself, but she swore there were no barriers, no machines, no signs. Nothing, just open desert on both sides of the highway. That night I looked it up online. The map showed the route still closed, listed as incomplete construction. But when I zoomed in, I saw something odd. A smaller road I didn't remember taking, marked simply as access. No name, no number. 2 days later, when I tried to pull it up again, it was gone, disappeared from the GPS entirely. I haven't worked the night shift since. I asked to transfer to evenings instead. The desert at dawn just doesn't feel right to me anymore. Because here's the part that still keeps me up some nights. The figure in the hard hat. In that fleeting second when the light hit his face, I don't think it was distorted by heat. I think what I was seeing was motion. Layers. Like he was flickering back and forth between being there and not. And when I heard my name through the radio, it didn't sound so much like it came from the speakers. It sounded like it came from behind me. Sometimes, when I'm halfway home now, I still glance at my mirrors, scanning the sand for lights or silhouettes ahead. But the strangest thing is this. Whenever my GPS says faster route found, my first instinct isn't to ignore it. It's to reach over and switch the whole thing off. Because I have this feeling that if I followed it again, I might not make it back before the sun comes up. I don't usually ask, but if this story is getting under your skin, show it some love. It really helps. I've driven trucks all my life. Oversized loads, cross-country hauls, supplies for construction jobs, and even rig parts for big companies out of Chattanooga. If you ever run these roads through the Smoky Mountains after dark, you know it's a different world out here. The slopes swallow headlights, mist creeps up the valleys and presses against the windshield, snarling your entire route. Even seasoned drivers will tell you they'd rather pull over and wait out the worst hours than gamble on blind corners and unexpected obstacles. That night, I'd picked up an emergency job, a rush order out of Asheville headed toward Knoxville, hauling steel plates needed for a major mountain road repair. I remember checking the weather twice because late spring in Appalachia means sudden rain, loose gravel, and, every so often, washed-out sections halfway up the ridges. Only the foolhardy, or the desperate, want to take these 2-lane cliffs with a trailer at midnight. The dispatcher warned me to take the scenic way and follow all detour cones, since crews were blasting rock faces along the main pass. I shrugged and promised her I'd go slow. By the time I left Asheville, drizzles shivered down hard enough to demand wipers on high. I passed through a few scattered hamlets, wooden signs for motels, clusters of mobile homes hunkered between thickets of trees, porch lights blinking in nobody's rhythm. Every gas station looked deserted, a single attendant watching me from behind green-tinted glass. Once I'd cleared the last diner outpost, a long stretch of highway opened up. That's when I saw the first flagman. He stood right in the center of the passing lane, holding up a red and white paddle that flashed stop when it caught my beams. Rain glistened off his poncho, pooling around his boots. I slowed, rolled down the window, and watched him approach. Expression blank, eyes hidden under the brim of a hard hat. He leaned close and spoke quietly, almost as if not to wake someone inside the woods. "Wait here. Blasting soon. Park by the cabin." His voice was low, thick with the accent I've heard all my life, and had a tired edge to it, like he hadn't slept in days. I squinted through the rain, searching for the cabin he mentioned. Sure enough, to the left, half swallowed by branches and wild grass, was a small prefab portable cabin. A cheap rental office with 2 windows and a busted aluminum door. A dim yellow bulb flickered above the entrance. The flagman moved with a slow limp, gesturing for me to pull off the highway and wait. Nobody else was on the road. Not a single other car passed. I found it strange, considering the repair job was supposed to be major, and figured maybe the flagman was letting vehicles through one by one. I parked the rig by the cabin, rain hammering on the roof. For a moment, I just sat there with the engine idling, the glow of my GPS sluggish as it tried to recalculate every few seconds. The mountain air was heavy, almost syrupy. Breathing hurt. After maybe 5 minutes, I got restless. I cut the lights and stepped outside, boots sinking into the mud. The cabin looked abandoned, yellow lights still flickering weakly, windows streaked with condensation, walls streaked with dark water stains. I knocked on the door. Instinct told me to wait for the flagman to return, but my nerves were spiking. The inside smelled like strong coffee gone sour, wet newspapers, and something musty, like old socks drying by a heater. I found a battered folding chair and sat, watching the clock tick on the wall. The radio on the desk spat static, then caught a burst of music. Old country song, fiddle and twang, fading in and out. For some reason, the song made the place feel sadder, lonelier. I wondered if the crew left it behind, or if the cabin doubled as a night shift break room. Lightning flickered outside. In the flash, I saw the flagman again. He wasn't walking toward the cabin or waving anyone down. He was pacing up and down the verge, eyes locked on the bend in the road as if waiting for something or someone. I called out, "We blasting soon?" He paused and looked at me, face shadowed, then shook his head once and pointed to the woods behind the cabin. "There's an old path. Don't go down there," he warned. Something about the way he said it, the careful choice of words, struck me. My granddad used to say the hollers out here held stories deeper than the riverbeds, places where the stories people don't tell collect over decades of silence. I thanked him, sat back down, and tried not to let my mind wander. The rain intensified, tapping out weird patterns on the roof, almost like fingers drumming, trying to get inside. Suddenly the radio cracked. Sharp, hissing static drowned out the music, followed by a clear alert in a computerized voice. "Emergency. Alert. Avoid Route 127. Hazard. Road collapse. Avoid." I froze. 127 was the road I'd just come in on. Panic clawed at my throat. Had the collapse already happened? Was the flagman with me? Was I supposed to get back on the highway or wait longer? The alert faded. The radio resumed its static, almost mocking me with the silence. I rushed outside and searched for the flagman. He was gone. No tracks, no sound, no movement except the wind in the trees. I turned back to the cabin, wanting answers. The inside felt colder now, as if a breeze snuck in under the door. The coffee pot was still steaming faintly, but everything else was still. I sat in the chair again and tried to steady my breath. A strange feeling crawled up my arms, a sense I wasn't alone. The woods behind the cabin seemed to pulse, branches swaying, shadows slipping between moments of lightning. Almost as if someone, or several someones, were watching from between the trees. I listened. The radio hissed quietly, and the only words I could make out between static bursts were, "Keep waiting. Don't leave. Keep waiting." But after another 20 minutes, my patience broke. I needed answers, and my run was late. I packed up, returned to the truck, and started for the bend in the road where the flagman had last stood. The cones marking the detour were gone. The flashing warning lights were gone. The only thing left was a muddy strip of tire tracks, mine running up to the cabin. I pressed on. The rain grew less, replaced by heavy mist rising off the asphalt. The trees reached in overhead, branches clawing at the sky. I drove slowly, headlights barely cutting through the gloom. The GPS blipped. No signal. I reached the spot where the flagman had first appeared. He was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a new sign stood just beyond the verge, half collapsed in the wet grass. Road closed, site under investigation. I stopped the truck, heart pounding. There, behind the sign, was the cabin. But it looked different. Windows boarded over, siding peeling, a patch of char clinging to one corner. Burn marks, blackened streaks across what used to be yellow paint. I climbed out, boots splashing in the mess. The rain had returned for a moment and then stopped completely, leaving absolute silence. I made my way to the cabin. 1 step, 2, then 3. The closer I got, the older and more ruined the building looked. The sign above the door hung crooked, warped by heat. There was a feeling in my chest, a cold, steady pressure, like someone was standing just beside me, just out of sight. Peering through a crack between boards, I saw only shadows twisting, shapes that made no sense. The whole place smelled now of fire, old sweat, and something sweet. Rotten apples. Suddenly, the rain resumed in full force, soaking me through. I scrambled back to the truck, gunning the engine. I sped down the road, desperate to get off the mountain, headlights cutting into empty space and slick pavement. That entire drive back down, maybe 6-7 miles. I didn't see another living soul. No workers, no vehicles, not even the glow of a single flashlight. Only my own tire tracks stretched behind me, etched in the mud. Once I reached Knoxville, I called the dispatcher to share what happened. She listened, silent, then told me, "Eddie, that cabin's been shut since '03, burned in a lightning storm. They found those warning signs charred out front. Nobody operates night shifts there anymore. Crew got relocated after the collapse." I didn't sleep that night. Something about the way the flagman watched me. The way his warning sounded less like a construction tip and more like a plea to keep me safe from something lurking behind the cabin. Something that had never left. I kept hearing those words on repeat. Keep waiting. Don't leave. Don't go down that path. Just wait. I haven't taken another mountain route after midnight since. Sometimes, on dry summer nights, I'll dream of the rain tapping the cab roof in strange rhythms. The haze sits so thick you can almost carve it. I'll wake up in sweat, remembering the flicker of yellow lights and the lonely flagman's face beneath his shadowed, hard hat. Sometimes I glance in my rear view at a bend in the road and see a limp figure standing in the mist just beyond the reach of my beams, waiting for traffic that will never come. And every time I think about stopping, every time the road goes quiet and my breath grows shallow, I hear that radio crackle back to life. Keep waiting. Don't leave. So I don't. I drive on. Because out here, the roads remember everything you leave behind. And sometimes, the people waiting for you aren't the ones still alive. If you're still listening, you probably enjoy stories like this. A like or a comment helps keep them alive. I used to think the pre-dawn hours were peaceful, that safety came at sunrise, and danger lived in the night. Maybe that's true for most people. But after what I went through last spring, I don't look at the early morning the same way. I don't take what seems real for granted. Not after what happened on the bypass behind Willow Creek. My name's Sarah Whitaker, and for almost 2 years, I drove for all the rideshare apps. Uber, Lyft, the new startups nobody's even heard of yet. It started as side cash, but turned into my full-time thing when I got laid off at the real estate office. My only rule was sticking to the suburbs around Pittsburgh. No downtown bars at closing, no after-midnight airport runs. I liked my regular pre-dawn crowd, nurses, teachers, factory workers on first shift, salt-of-the-earth types who just needed a ride before the sun. I never got a weird feeling about my passengers, not until March. That was when they started the big sewer project on the Willow Creek bypass, a mile-long, half-completed strip on the edge of town, usually empty except for orange drums, cement mixers, and the faint hum of those huge generator lights. Some mornings it was the only route on my app. I figured construction was just background noise, a few extra cones and the occasional lane closure. My mistake. The air's always colder before sunrise out here. That's something I noticed early on. The frost bites through your jacket and makes the silence sharper, like it's got edges. There's always the smell of rain, even if it hasn't rained in days. If I rolled my window down, I could hear the tap of water dripping off busted fencing, echoing in the empty lots nearby. The first time I picked him up, it was easy to miss. He booked under the name Mark W. No rating, no photo. People say that's a red flag, but I'd seen it 100 times with new users or cashless temp workers. The pin dropped at the bypass south entrance. The phone said, "Construction worker, need lift to site entrance, early shift." I figured maybe the crew needed a ride from the parking circle where the Detour started, and the regular bus was down. It was a little before 5, heavy mist over the pavement. I pulled my Mazda to a stop just past the blinking arrow board, watching steam coil from the gutters. He stood waiting in full gear, hard hat, reflective vest with stripes, old canvas jacket underneath, boots covered in dust and mud. He was taller than average, maybe 6'1" and thin. There was nothing strange about him except his absolute stillness, almost statue still like he'd been standing there a long while. He slid into the back seat, didn't say hello. His boots thudded quietly as he arranged something in his lap, a battered red lunch cooler with the logo scratched off. His smell hit first, not bad exactly, just sharp. A mix of cold metal, wet concrete, and that weird ozone tang you sometimes get after a thunderstorm. It didn't bother me, but I noticed it. He said, "Up to the site entrance, please. By the drums." His voice was plain, no strong accent, maybe exhausted. I punched the spot in the app just a third of a mile up the Detour and rolled forward as slow as the bumps let me. The construction lights stuttered overhead, casting the road in weird alternating shadows. He didn't make small talk. Eyes fixed out the window, tracking the rows of closed storefronts and half-finished sidewalks. No phone, no coffee. I tried a little joke. Rough to pull double shifts on days like this, huh? He just nodded. Faint. So faint I only saw it in the rear view. We hit the end point, just past where the dirt took over and a line of orange drums formed a blockade. He slid out, didn't say thank you, but shut the door soft behind him. Sometimes passengers are like that. Work fatigue, personality, whatever. What stood out was the way he stood there for a second, watching me go, never turning his back to the car, then ducked through a gap in the drums and disappeared out of sight. For the next 2 weeks, I picked up 2 or 3 more night shift workers near Willow Creek. I never saw that same guy again, at least not then. But every time I passed that section, I kept glimpsing someone moving behind the cones. I wrote it off as normal, probably early starters waiting for gear checks. Suburbs can play tricks on you when the lights are weird and the streets empty. Then the strangeness started. It was a Tuesday. My app buzzed at 4:40 a.m., usual hour for shift changes. Pickup on the bypass. Same pin, but the note was different. Bring rider to North Connector, by the old lot. Name on the call was W. Mark. Like last time, no profile pic, no rating. I pulled up to the same place. Fog heavier this time. The car's headlights barely showed the other side of the street. The seatbelt chime dinged when he climbed in. Nearly jumped out of my skin. It was him. Same hard hat, same red cooler. This time, his hands looked muddier, and I noticed a worn patch on the sleeve of his jacket. Again, I thought about saying something, but didn't. There's this tension in the car when people don't want conversation. They build a wall without saying a word. We did the same slow, roll up the bypass. I tried my earlier trick. "Crew bus broke down again?" he replied flatly. "Didn't show tonight. Sometimes things get mixed up." He was looking at the construction lights. They flickered and popped, and for a split second they seemed almost blue, like old police lights. I remember thinking, that's not right. These are always amber. We hit the site, and he got out. I asked, "Need a ride again tomorrow?" He shook his head, barely a movement, and stepped into the shadows behind the barrels. That ozone smell hit even stronger when the door opened, like the air after metal snaps in a live storm. I tried to flag another passenger, but my phone rebooted twice on its own, once when I hit next ride, and again as I tried to take a photo of my route notification for a memory. Each time, the screen flashed a weird static for half a second, gray like broken TV snow. Next morning, the app glitched. My pickup map showed 3 Willow Creek bypass calls, all for 4:40 a.m., all for variants of Mark W or W Mark. I cancelled them and went on with my day, but for the next few shifts, I avoided that stretch. Too weird. But then, by Friday, I was back. Bills, you know? You can't ignore the best fares. The weather had turned. Rain all evening, mud flooding the lower parking lots. I drove the Detour as usual, but this time the bypass was empty. Just cones. No workers. Not even the big spotlights. Headlights flickered in my rear view. Nothing when I turned. I ended my shift early and pulled into an all-night diner for coffee. Place was a dump. Narrow booths, burnt countertop, one old-timer in a reflective vest at the bar. I don't know why, but I mentioned to the fry cook that the construction zone looked dead and that a couple rideshare workers there seemed odd lately. He frowned. "They shut that job down this week," he muttered, pouring my coffee. "Guy got hit last winter. Never replaced him. You sure you picked up anyone this week?" Something inside me froze. "Yeah, guy named Mark, wore a hard hat and vest." The cook's face was empty for a second. Then he gave a little shake. "That's strange. They told me he was the only one left working night cleanup, but then he vanished." He looked toward the window, muttered something under his breath. Something like, "Old roads take what's given." After that, things kicked into high gear. The very next day, 4:37 a.m., my phone pinged a route. Willow Creek bypass. No name attached this time, just a blank profile with static noise as the picture. The app forced me into navigation mode like it was on autopilot. I shut off the app, pulled into the bypass, and saw, again, the same lone worker waiting at the break in the drums. This time I rolled my window down and asked, "You need a ride?" He stared at me for a long, slow beat. Steam rose from his jacket. Then he spoke, voice smoother than before. "I just need to go home. Take me home." The words rang in my ears. Felt like more than a request. A kind of pleading, or maybe an apology. But as soon as I opened the door for him, every headlight in the construction zone shut off, leaving us in pure darkness except for my dash screen's pale glow. Something cold swept into the car. He sat beside me. I started driving. "Where's home?" I asked. He didn't answer. I followed the detour, but it looped, the GPS spinning, recalculating, blinking, unknown location. Out the window, everything was fog, cones, and emptiness. We passed the same broken drum twice, I'm sure of it. He didn't move, just stared straight ahead, breathing shallow. After what felt like hours, my phone screen flashed with an address. An old house in the township, 2 streets over from my childhood home. Door still closed, lights still off. When I stopped at the curb, he stepped out without looking at me. The air in the car lightened, almost gently. The smell faded. In the side mirror, I watched him walk up the path toward the door. He didn't go inside. The porch light blinked on. He vanished. Just gone. No shadow, no mark on the walk. For minutes, all I could do was sit, gripping the steering wheel. I flipped through the rideshare log. No record of the pickup, no address, nothing to show I was ever on the bypass that morning. I asked around the next week at the city public works office and among the other drivers at the gas station. There'd been a fatal accident at Willow Creek the year before. A worker run down in fog. Name: Mark W. Had no surviving family in the area. They couldn't find anyone at the funeral except union reps. For days, every time I passed the bypass, I felt eyes tracking my car. There'd be flickers of something at the edge of the zone. A figure behind a flapping tarp, boots glinting under the half-lit scaffolding. The air always thick with that weird ozone metal storm scent. The next time I took an early pickup, my phone buzzed just as I crossed by the construction site. The notification was a simple message. Thank you. Route complete. I never accepted another request in that zone again. People say construction is about building, not holding on to the past. But sometimes, I think stretches of road remember too much. They hold unfinished work, unfinished stories. The city cleared the bypass, replaced it with bright lights, a new black top, paved right over the past. But sometimes, before dawn, I take the long way to avoid Willow Creek. I don't book rides for the first hour of day anymore. If I see a worker waving at the cones when I pass, I keep my eyes on the road. I don't slow down, don't look back, because some shifts never end, and some passengers never make it home. Thanks for listening, if you made it through the darkness. And if you ever pick up a ride near a closed lane at dawn, go ahead and double-check who's getting in your car, just in case. Some people say construction zones mean progress, new beginnings, a sign a place is getting better, safer. But after all those long nights and unfinished stretches of road, a part of me wonders if some spaces aren't meant to be rebuilt. Maybe they're warnings, not just for our cars, but for us. A reminder that the places we pass through at dawn can be stranger and lonelier than we imagine. Even now, whenever I see cones and flickering lights on an empty lane before sunrise, I slow down just a little. I keep my eyes ahead, but a small part of me listens for footsteps in the gravel or looks for a silhouette waving in the fog. Because you never really know who or what might still be working when the world thinks the shift is over. Thanks for listening, if you made it through the darkness. And next time you're on the road before daylight, remember, some warnings aren't just for traffic. They're for anyone who dares to drive through spaces that don't quite belong to the living or the dead. Good night.